As you guys probably know, we had our first book come out last year during COVID. So this is actually our first in a bookstore book launch ever. And it's a dream come true for me. It's a lifelong ambition. And we're beyond thrilled. So, by the way, Eric and Bill that are here actually read the very first version of this when it was in its infancy. Carol and I started this as a collaborative project long before we were even dating, when we were just friends. We had the idea that it would be fun to do a Christmas story every year to give our friends. So I wrote the story and Carol did the illustrations, and then we bound them and gave them out. So, flash forward 16 years later, I pitched to Lou Aronica at the Story Plant, our publisher, doing a collection of the 4 short stories together. And Lou read the stories and thought, no, these are novels. You need to expand them. Those of you who've read some of my writing know I tend to go a little bit on the long side. I'm being told to expand something was quite a happy surprise and a joy. So these are more than twice as long as the originals, and I think they're very different. But I also think they're a lot more mature than they were at the time. And Carol has certainly had time to reinvent and expand the illustrations a bit. You want to talk about the illustrations?
I would like to talk about them after you talk about the book.
Okay. Sure. Well, this is a winter tale. It's a ghost story. And when I had the idea with this, I was at the James Joyce Irish Pub, that's no longer there, in Avondale with Bill. And I'd been working on a completely different story. And I had this idea, and it didn't leave my head. I just sort of fell in love with it. And I started writing it that very night. And that weekend, Carol and I were going to Tennessee to visit her parents. And I wrote more than half of it that weekend while we were away from home. Mm-hmm. And I think it's my favorite of all the ones we did. One thing that happened when we expanded them is they changed a bit. In the original version of the story, Jesse, the main character, is a folklorist who is trying to trace an urban legend, one of those, oh, I swear it's true, I heard it from a friend of a friend, back to its original source, back to the original author of the urban legend. And in the story, that's really all she was. She was a folklorist, and the driving element of the story for her was solving this mystery and getting to the bottom of it. But this time around, Jessie got a backstory, and that she is a grieving widow. She's recently lost her husband, and she's lost in grief and has an encounter with something that might be called miraculous. Without spoilers, it sends her to a place of peace and healing. Now, the last year's story, Raven Wakes the World, was also about a woman lost in grief who has an encounter with something supernatural that leads her to a place of comfort and healing. I really had not noticed that, but you'll be glad to know that next year's stories is a change of pace, in that it's a man who is lost in grief. Has an encounter with something that might be called a miracle, and it leads you to a place of yeah. Anyway, that one's sort of a Christmassy national treasure, Indiana Jones action adventure, ancient mystery type story. And the one after that is a rom-com, which has no grief at all, except that there's a lot of puns. So if there's grief, it's not one of the characters in the stories.
From the dad jokes.
Yeah. Which actually, teasing a story that's not coming out for 2 years, was an idea I got the first time I went to Carol's bathroom when we were dating.
Okay.
And as a guy, that's not really a place where we normally go. And all her makeup was out. And I was reading the labels because, it's a mystery to me. And as I'm reading the labels of it, this should be much cooler than it actually is. There was like vanishing cream, concealer. My favorite, and I swear this is real. I'm talking to the guys now. It was called anti-gravity lift cream.
How disappointing.
It did not. But I kept thinking, so that story has a woman who gets a Christmas wish and doesn't believe it. So she sort of dismisses it and said, I wish all this makeup did what it really said it would do.
Oh.
So like clarifying lotion, she spills on a bewildering spreadsheet and suddenly she can understand it. Vanishing cream makes things disappear. You get the idea. And yes, I use the anti-gravity lift cream. But I guess we should talk about the book that's coming out 2 years before then, Christmas Past. It was originally called I'll Be Home for Christmas, from the song. And we had to change the title because there's a lot of books called I'll Be Home for Christmas. There's also another book called Christmas Past, but it's called A Cowboy's Christmas Past.
There's a lot of books called Christmas Past.
Yeah, but they don't have TV commercials, and we have TV commercials this time, which I'm enormously proud of. By the way, one thing we did differently for next year's book was normally I wrote the story and then Carol would do illustrations. For the one that became next year's book, Carol did the illustrations first, and then I had to come up with a story to match them.
So just to embellish on that, I went to Europe.
Yeah.
That was the one I went to Europe, and I came back and I just made this list of things that I thought, just like random objects from traveling. And I just gave him this like list of 12 things. Just pick from those. And so he picked a subset of those and he constructed a story for it. So we tried to get a little playful about the narrative there. So
of all of these, that's the one that probably has changed the most, going from story to novel. I assume, because I technically haven't written it yet, but I have a month, so.
No problem, right on.
A month?
I've started it.
Goodness.
And I know how it ends, so.
Just have to get the middle.
It'll get done. So,
Should I say?
sure.
Okay. Okay, so just a little about the illustrations this time. So for this time, we had the sort of, let's call it the prototype several years ago, and I had some illustrations from that, but John had rewritten it and changed it a lot. So I read it again a couple of times and tried to pull out some of the basic themes. So it's actually a little bit hard to talk about some of it because I don't want to give spoilers, but there, some of the things were like separation and renewal and fracturing and kind of rebinding. And so I like for the illustrations to kind of, they're not just telling a moment, but they're, there's some continuity between them. So between the illustrations and the drop caps, there's a little bit of a story going on within them. So I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you look a little bit deeper into stringing those things together. And one of the characters, so I was trying to figure out, the first time around I had done more of a photo montage than drawn illustration. One of the characters comes from a time frame that kind of lent itself to photojournalism, let's say, without giving any more away. So talking about Jessie and the fact that she was a folklorist and now she's a cultural anthropologist, but what she's actually trying to do is she's trying to find facts. Ironically, she deals with story, but in the pursuit of this story, she's trying to track down facts and she's trying to get a grasp on sort of solid, tangible things. And I thought that kind of lent itself to photo montages. So these are all photo montages. And there's some different.
But you drew some in it too. The figure on the cover, for example.
Yeah, there's some drawing.
Sorry.
There's some drawing in there. And I was trying to give the sense of a little bit of the, the contrast between the factual and the photorealistic. And there's some elements of there are like maps and photographs and newspapers. These are all sort of tangible, concrete things. She is trying to string together this sort of picture of reality. But then there's these other elements that are sort of like maybe, layers of time, and there's things are obscured and things are a little bit mysterious. And so that was a little bit of the thinking behind some of the illustrations. And then I try to spend a little bit of time with the drop caps to make them a little bit more fun. And then just like and then I try to seed it with some different things. Like for instance, the what do you call it? The divider.
Scene break.
The scene break thingy. So just to be a little bit thematic. So it actually, in Morse code, it actually spells out Emily and Sam, who are two of the characters. So I just try to populate.
I'm sure y'all would have caught that.
I know you totally would have gotten that and pulled it out there. But just try to seed it with some different elements of the story so that it hopefully it lasts a couple of readings. And then for the cover, it was the same thing. It's just trying to give the sense of layering and time. And Raven was a much more graphical cover, but this one was a lot more painterly, and we're pretty happy with the way the cover turned out with and hope that you find some depth in it, both in the story and the pictures.
Carol did the publisher suggests we do a spot varnish like on the text and stuff, and Carol did this sort of painterly approach that neither the publisher nor I had ever seen before, nor had the printer, but it really came out just beautifully, and I'm really thrilled.
That's good reason.
Yeah, see, this was the advanced reading copy that we have that went out to the media and bookstores and stuff, and I fell in love with it. But then I saw this, this is dead to me now. Nonetheless, it's the one I'll be reading from.
We like the size too, and we hope it fits into your stockings.
Yeah, all your Christmas shopping done tonight. So I have to say that collaborating on this with Carol has been just an absolute joy. The old saying, the family that creates together finds all kinds of new and amazing things to argue about. But nonetheless, it is an absolute treat and a joy. So,
Right on.
thanks. So I'm going to read the first chapter, and the chapters are pretty short in this, and they all have names that sort of echo how urban legends sound. So I'm going to read the first chapter, and if there's time, I'll read one more scene that's one of the flashback scenes that gives a little bit of Jesse's history. So this is chapter 1, The Vanishing Workday. By the way, I wish that I could have the woman who reads the audiobook version read this, because she is absolutely amazing. And this is told in first person from a woman's point of view. So you have to imagine my voice being a little bit higher. But she does an amazing job. I was going to do it in falsetto, but Carol said no. None of the flashbacks were in the original. So all of Jesse's backstory and her marriage and her loss are new to this version. And it really, I think, makes it a richer experience. Good. And a better companion for Raven, even though that was an accident. Want to talk more?
It is about time for questions.
Yeah. Anybody have questions to ask?
How was Raven an accident?
I meant the fact that they're both about grief.
Oh,
about women finding grief. I think we all go through dark places in our life, and the thing we want to do most is cocoon ourselves and shut away the world. But we can't do that for long because we need to be in the world, and the world needs us to be in it. So eventually, something is going to call us back to be on the path we're meant to be on. And I think a word for that force that pulls us to the place we need to be is miracle. And that's what these first two stories and next year's as well, to a degree, are about.
thank you.
Anybody else? All right. I really appreciate. Oh, hey, Nikki.
Hey, how was it writing a female character?
Honestly, I've written a lot. I tend to do either first person or limited omniscient from a character's point of view, and I've done women as much as men in writing. So that, yeah, rephrased.
Now we know why you married her.
That's wonderful, though.
Yeah, it's a joy. It's a joy to do it because the first book I wrote, which is now coming out, I think in 2024, is also the longest book I've ever written. Is all told in first person, but each chapter has a different narrator, so they all had to sound different. And the characters that I found the most interesting to write were the women. And the easiest to distinguish from other characters were the women. I don't know why that is.
They're good examples.
Yeah. I guess when you create, you want to explore the things you know the least. So there you go. No, I really don't know.
So why an American in London?
Partially because it's a ghost story, and London is full of ghost stories. And if you're going to write a story about a ghost at Christmas, it starts with Dickens. And Carol and I had our first date in London by going to London.
Nice.
Go big or go home, right? And
For New Year's.
Yeah.
2000.
that was the second trip.
Oh, that was, okay, right. The first was
Our second date.
a research trip. The first one was a research trip.
So we,
Great.
I went to the Dickens house while Carol went elsewhere. And we both went to the Cheshire Cheese, which was Dickens' favorite pub. But I put a lot of nods to Dickens in here. Someone refers to Dickens at one point. It snows in here. It doesn't actually snow in London, but I'm convinced it did during Dickens' day because we've all seen Christmas Carol. It snows. So apparently there was some great geological shift in the past. There's even a Marley Lane.
Oh.
And one of my favorite first sentences ever in literature is Marley was dead to begin with from A Christmas Carol. And so I put a Marley Lane in here. And it also inspired the first sentence of this, bringing the ghost in early. So my first sentences usually tend to do with place to put you in a setting. So this one does. It starts with I was in London, but it also brings the ghost in early. So it brings the story in almost right away. And I think there's not a city on the planet that feels more haunted than London.
Never been there.
Recommend it.
Thank you.
What is your writing process?
Holy crap.
Got it
Chaotic.
on tape.
Very disciplined. I will say, right, as observing from the side, he's very disciplined about constantly writing.
Did you hear that, Lou? I'm sure my publisher is watching from afar. Actually, he's not, but he'll be watching the recording. Our friend Benji, who had his book signing here, is doing an online book club tonight. And we'll be doing the same one in January. I had mentioned that, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Sorry. Anyway, It's a point about Benji at some point.
Well, we were talking about London
Yeah, writing process. That's
writing
right.
process, right?
I'm a big believer in there's 8 points of a story you have to know before you should start writing. This is technical structure, and I have a long video on my website about story structure and how the stories work. And I've given this talk at Georgia State 3 or 4 times, and Broadleaf once, at a fantasy convention called Conjuration. And it's everything I know about story structure. I think you have to know your basic structure before you can start. And then you sort of discover the characters and fletch in between those points. So I think you have to know your, whenever I've heard somebody talking about writer's block, it's just about always been they don't know their story well enough. But once you're in the habit of writing regularly, and once you sort of get the voices of your characters, you find you sort of want to spend time with them and hear what they have to say. I know writers who are constantly surprised by how their story unfolds. And I'm not one of them because I generally know the high beats of where it's going to go. But I have been surprised by things that characters, especially the way characters reacted to each other. There was one pair that wound up romantically involved that had never occurred to me when I was plotting out the story that there would be chemistry there, but there was, and I went with it, and it really added flavor. So to answer the question, I know my story, I know the beats, and I'll let the characters take over and fill in.
That must be the hard part, getting the conversation. Any conversation going between, I know you can do it just sitting here, but still.
Getting started
Writing it
is the
down.
hardest. I mean, great advice for writers. Number one, know your story. Number two, if you have in your heart the God-given ability to not write, please embrace that. You'll be much happier. If you don't, one thing that I shared with Marianne, Marianne and I met in chorus in high school. And I learned as much about writing in chorus as pretty much anywhere else. I mean, I was supposed to be learning other things at the time, but I think Ms. Pritchett was glad to know that I did at least learn something at that point. But listen to a lot of music, because that rhythm gives your writing more of a flow and poetry. You learn to sort of have a meter to your writing. The second is listen to people talk and remember all their different mannerisms, and you'll find yourself with this stew pot that you can pull from and get great voices. They don't sound like any one person, but if you really look and think about it, you can probably digest and find 3 or 4 people that blended together to make this voice for that character. The first book I wrote, I based a character on John Burnett back there. By the time I got through with it, I think John would have, except for the fact I named the character John would have otherwise had no idea, because the character diverted very, very far from John by the time the book was finished. But it's great to have a starting place like that.
Any other questions?
Speaking of the autograph,
Yeah,
Sure.
we brought pens.
We did.
All right.
One more. Hey, Charlie.
is there something special about the in-laws in your writing? You went to Carol's parents and you wrote half the book.
Well, the decoration.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that. There's also not a lot to do in Morristown, and they had a lot of talking and catching up to do, and I had free time, so that helped.
Yeah.
But decoration, that was mostly it.
Well, the ornament.
Yeah.
The ornament we gave to them. Remember that?
No,
I don't
the
remember.
ornament wasn't in the first version of the story, though.
No, but it is related to them.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll tell one cute story then. It's tangential. We had gone to, we went to Canada, what's it?
Quebec City.
Quebec City. brought back a beautiful little hand-blown ornament for my parents, gave it to my mom, and then years later, we go up there, and by this time she's like full into dementia. And she gave it to me. She had sort of they weren't really doing so much holiday shopping or things like that, but this was very much kind of associated to the holidays for us at that point, and it became really bittersweet. She gave it back to me with a little note that said, "My best friend gave this to me, and I really want you to have it."
Oh,
And she had just
wonderful.
so now I'm not touching that note. I think it just made that idea of a beautiful little ornament kind of very special.
For those of you who don't mind spoilers, that will probably be Christmas Story 2028 or something.
Everybody done.